She had built a beautiful box, and she was proud of it, and she kept it locked. Then the forest sent something very small to open it, and it opened everything. Here is where our story begins. The forbidden forest in late October smelled of wet iron and rotting oak leaves, and Hermione Granger had been kneeling in it for 3 hours. Her knees had gone past aching into a dull, distant numbness. Around her wrists, the ward seed pouches hung heavy with what Professor Sprout called anchor mast, acorns steeped in silver nitrate and dragon's blood, each one meant to be pressed into the earth at precise intervals along the perimeter where the old boundary had been torn open during the battle. 18 months, and the forest still leaked. Things came out of it at night that had no business walking on the grounds. So there were 2 8th-year students on the perimeter at dusk, because Professor Sprout had said, with a bluntness that admitted no appeal, that the work required a Muggle-born's patience and a Malfoy's ancestral warding blood, and that they would both simply have to endure one another. They had endured for 11 days. You're setting them too deep. Hermione did not look up. She pressed the acorn into the loam with her thumb, felt the soil give, felt the faint answering pulse as the seed took hold. They're set at 4 inches, which is the depth given in Bathsheba's Boundary Praxis, 3rd edition, page 211. Bathsheba babbling wrote about Wiltshire chalk. Draco Malfoy's voice came from 6 feet behind her, flat and unhurried. This is peat over granite. Water sits in it. 4 inches and the seed drowns before the frost. She sat back on her heels. The problem, the perpetual, grinding problem of the last 11 days, was that he was usually right about this, and that he said it in a tone which suggested he found being right about it a tremendous inconvenience. Then what depth? 2.5, 3 at the low ground. A pause. You've done 40 of them, so that's 40 to lift and reset before the light goes. She turned her head then and looked at him. He was standing with his hands in the pockets of his coat, which was black and too fine for field work, and had, she'd noticed, been mended at the left cuff by someone who was not a house elf. The lowering sun came sideways through the trunks and did nothing kind to him. He had the pallor of someone who had spent 1.5 years sleeping badly. There was a smear of soil along his jaw where he'd pushed his hair back, and he did not know it was there, and she was not going to tell him. You could have said something at seed number 1, Hermione said. I could have. But you'd rather I do it 40 times wrong. I'd rather, he said, not spend my afternoon explaining chalk to a girl who has never once, in 8 years, listened to a word I've said. The words landed with a small, precise sting, and she turned back to the soil because that was easier than answering. There was a rhythm to their arguments now. He struck, she struck, and neither of them ever quite came away bleeding, and afterwards they worked in a silence that had become almost comfortable, which was the most alarming development of her academic career. She began lifting the acorns. The light thickened. Somewhere deep in the trees, a bow truckle chattered and went quiet. The cold came up out of the ground and into her wrists, and her breath started to show, and behind her she could hear the soft, irregular sound of Draco working his own section of the line. The scrape of the trowel, the pause, the scrape. She was on the 61st seed when it happened. Later, she would try to reconstruct it and find that she could not. There was a mote of blue light at the edge of her vision, low over the leaf litter, drifting the way a spark drifts up from a fire. She thought, wisp. She thought, too low for a wisp. She reached out with her left hand to steady herself against the root of a beech, and the light settled on the inside of her wrist with the weightlessness of ash. Then it bit her. The pain was extraordinary, out of all proportion to its size. A hot silver needle driven straight through the vein and out the other side. Hermione heard someone make a sound and understood distantly that the sound had been hers, and then the forest floor tilted and came up to meet her shoulder. Granger. The world was very loud and very far away. There was bark against her cheek. Her arm had gone cold from the elbow down, and there was something moving under the skin of her forearm, something bright travelling upward toward her heart with the leisurely certainty of ink spreading in water. Granger. Hands on her. That registered. Hands on her shoulder and under her jaw, and they were not gentle. They were fast and hard and frightened. Look at me. Look at my face. What bit you? Blue, she said. Her tongue felt too big. Blue light. Small. Something happened above her. A sharp intake of breath, cut short. Right. His voice had changed. It had gone very calm and very level, and she understood in the swimming margins of her thoughts that this was what Draco Malfoy sounded like when he was terrified. He became reasonable. Right. You're going to hold on to me. Don't argue about it. I'm not. You're already arguing. She was lifted. She had not expected that. There was a moment of appalling disorientation, and then her cheek was against the collar of his coat, and her arms had gone round his neck of their own volition, and he was moving fast through the trees, and every stride jolted the silver needle deeper into her. The coat smelled of cedar and cold air, and, faintly underneath, of something green and bitter. The anchor mast ground into the wool. She could hear his heart. It was going far too quickly for the pace he was setting. She began. Don't talk. You're running. I said, don't talk, Granger. God, do you ever? He broke off. The trees thinned. Ahead of them, the lawn opened out, grey gold, and the castle stood above it with its scaffolding black against the sky, and the windows had begun to light one by one. 12 minutes. Stay awake for 12 minutes, and you can go back to correcting me for the rest of your life. She did not remember the lawn. She remembered a door and stone, and the particular quality of light in the hospital wing at evening, which fell in long chalky bars across the beds and made everything look older than it was. And she remembered being set down. Carefully, that was the thing. He had run half a mile, and he set her down on the mattress as though she were made of something that could crack. And then, hearing him say Madame Pomfrey's name in a voice that had no arrogance left in it at all. Well, said Madame Pomfrey 20 minutes later. That explains it. Hermione was propped against 3 pillows. The cold had drained out of her arm and left behind a strange, buzzing warmth that sat just beneath the collarbone, like a swallow of fire whiskey that had never quite gone down. On the inside of her wrist there was a mark the size of a lentil, perfectly round, the pale blue of a bruise on its 4th day. Explains what, exactly? You've been bitten by a love bug. Pomfrey set down the lamp. Pediculus cordis. Nasty little thing to catch, common as anything in old forests. Don't look at me like that, Miss Granger. The name is not my doing. There was a sound from the foot of the bed. Draco had not left. He was standing with his back against the window frame and his arms folded, and he had not moved from that spot since he'd put her down, and he had not said one word in 20 minutes. "A love bug," Hermione repeated. "Yes. So, I'm going to fall in love now." "No," said Pomfrey in the tone of a woman correcting a spelling. "It doesn't manufacture a thing. It hasn't the complexity. You could fit 9 of them on a sickle." "Then what does it do?" Madame Pomfrey folded the blanket back over her knee with brisk hands. "It removes your capacity to conceal," she said. "That's all. Any affection you already carry for another person, real affection, mind, it can't work on nothing. You will no longer be able to hide it. Not the small signals, not the involuntary ones." She straightened. "Your face will tell the truth. Your hands will tell the truth. You may find that inconvenient for a while." The buzzing under Hermione's collarbone gave one slow, luxurious pulse. "For how long?" "It passes." Pomfrey was already turning toward the cabinet. "They always pass. Rest tonight, no exertion. I'll have the mark looked at in the morning." And she went, and the door of her office clicked shut, and the hospital wing was suddenly enormous and very quiet. Hermione looked at her hands lying on the blanket. "It's fine," she thought. "It's fine. It only affects what you already feel. I feel affection for Harry, for Ron, differently now. But yes, for Ginny, for Neville, for Professor McGonagall, God help me. This is a mild social nuisance and nothing more. This is a fortnight of being slightly warmer than usual to people I already—" "Granger." She looked up. He had come away from the window. He was standing at the foot of the bed with the lamplight catching the side of his face, and there was still soil along his jaw, dried now, and his collar was crooked from where her arms had been around his neck. "You'll want your wand back." He held it out. "It came out of your pocket somewhere near the beach line. I picked it up." She reached for it. Their fingers touched, the barest friction, wood and skin, nothing at all. And Hermione's hand did not withdraw. It stayed. It turned. Her thumb moved across the knuckle of his index finger, slowly, once, with a tenderness so absolute and so entirely unrequested that she felt the shock of it travel all the way up her arm and into her throat. She was aware of every part of it. That was the horror. She was watching her own hand do this, and her mind was screaming at it in perfect, articulate sentences. And the hand was not listening, and it did not stop. And when at last she got it back into her lap, it was because the muscle had finished what it wanted, not because she had reclaimed it. Draco had gone completely still. She looked up at him and felt her mouth begin, without any permission whatsoever, to smile. It was not a polite smile. It was warm and open and helplessly pleased, the smile of a woman greeting someone she has waited all day to see, and it spread across her face while every rational faculty she possessed hammered against the inside of her skull, and she could not stop it, and he was watching it happen. "Thank you," she heard herself say in a voice like honey, "for carrying me." The silence went on for a very long time. Then Draco Malfoy set her wand down on the blanket, turned, and walked out of the hospital wing without looking back once. She did not sleep. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Hermione gave up the pretense and lay on her back in the hospital bed with her eyes open, counting the ribs of the vaulted ceiling, and conducted a trial. The prosecution's case was simple. You touched his hand. You stroked his knuckle like a woman soothing a nervous horse. You smiled at him with your whole face, in front of him, while looking directly at him. The defense rose and said, "I was drugged, bitten, envenomed. There was a parasite in my blood." And the prosecution, which had Hermione Granger's voice and Hermione Granger's merciless precision, said, "Pomfrey told you what it does. It manufactures nothing. It has not the complexity. It works only on what is already there." The defense sat down and did not get up again. She turned onto her side and pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, where the buzzing had settled into something low and constant, like a struck bell 3 rooms away. Under the skin of her wrist, the little blue mark had gone slightly darker. She could feel it if she concentrated. Not pain, but a kind of attentiveness, as though something small and patient had taken up residence in her and was waiting with great courtesy for her to encounter a person she cared about. "It's a mistake," she told the ceiling. "It's misfiled. It's read some scrap of adrenaline off the run through the forest and mistaken it for—" The bell rang softly beneath her collarbone. "Oh, be quiet," thought Hermione, and pulled the blanket over her head. Pomfrey released her at 7 with a strip of muslin over the bite, and the observation, delivered without any particular sympathy, that the first 3 days were generally the loudest. The great hall at breakfast was full of grey rain light. The scaffolding along the north wall had been draped in canvas against the weather, and it breathed in and out with the draught, and the enchanted ceiling above showed a low sky the colour of pewter, and the smell of the room was porridge and wet wool, and the faint, ever-present chalk dust of new mortar. Hermione sat down between Ginny and Neville and immediately began building fortifications. Rules, she thought, buttering toast with great concentration. 1. Do not look toward the Slytherin table. Not once. Not to check the time on the wall behind it. 2. Keep both hands occupied at all times. 3. If he enters, become extremely interested in something at the far end of the room. "You're doing the thing with your jaw," said Ginny. "I'm not doing anything with my jaw." "You're doing the thing where you clench it and then pretend you're chewing." Ginny leaned in, cheerful and pitiless. "Pomfrey said you got bitten. What was it, Doxies?" "A parasite." "What sort of parasite?" "A very small and extremely boring one," said Hermione, "with a stupid name, and it doesn't matter, and I'd rather discuss the charms essay." She got through 11 minutes. At the 12th, the doors opened, and she knew it before she saw it, because the bell under her collarbone rang once and then kept ringing, and every hair on her forearms lifted as though someone had drawn a hand across the air. "Do not look. Do not look. Do not—" She looked. He came in with Theodore Nott and Blaise Zabini, and he looked as though he had slept about as well as she had. There was a bruise-coloured cast beneath his eyes. His hair was damp. He'd been outside already then, on the perimeter without her, and his coat was dark across the shoulders with rain, and as he walked, he pulled off his gloves finger by finger with a precise, ill-tempered efficiency. Hermione's face performed an act of treason. she felt it go. She felt her eyebrows lift and her mouth soften, and the whole architecture of her expression rearrange itself into something so obviously, so unmistakably glad, that Neville, who was sitting opposite, looked over his shoulder to see what had made her happy. "Hermione, you are—" Neville hesitated. "You're smiling at the Slytherin table." "I'm smiling at the window," she said. "Behind the Slytherin table. The light is remarkable this morning. It's raining. That's what's remarkable about it." She looked down at her plate and made herself eat a piece of toast that tasted of absolutely nothing. And she was aware, with the awful clarity of a woman watching her own house burn from across the road, that she had held that smile for 4 full seconds, and that at the end of it, Draco Malfoy had lifted his head and caught her doing it. The rest of the day was a series of small, exquisite public disasters. In advanced arithmancy, she reached across the desk to pass him the shared table of correspondences, and her fingers, having delivered the parchment, went on to straighten the cuff of his sleeve, twice, neatly, as though she had every right in the world to be tidying him. He froze. He looked down at his own wrist as if it had been rearranged by a poltergeist. "Granger, I'm aware." "Then perhaps—" "I said I'm aware," she hissed, and put both hands flat on the desk and left them there, splayed like a woman bracing on the deck of a ship for the remaining 50 minutes of the lesson. In the corridor between arithmancy and lunch, Pansy Parkinson said something to him that made him almost laugh. A low, dry sound, no more than an exhalation. And Hermione, 3 yards behind them with her bag over her shoulder, felt her stomach fold in on itself with such violence that she had to stop walking. No, she thought, with pure horror. No, absolutely not. That is not one of the permitted symptoms. The bell under her collarbone rang, and did not care. At lunch, she dropped her fork. At 2:30 in the library, she caught herself watching the door for 8 minutes without a single word of advanced rune translation entering her head. At 4:30, she passed him on the stair and said, "Hello," in a voice so warm and so unguarded that a pair of 3rd years turned round to see who was being greeted. He did not answer, and by evening, this was the part she would replay for weeks. By evening, she understood that he had begun to avoid her, and that it was working, and that some small, unreasonable animal in her chest had started to grieve about it. It broke on the 4th day in the library at 10 minutes to closing. She had chosen the table in the northeast alcove precisely because nobody used it. It sat under a window with a broken sash that let in a thin, cold blade of air, and the lamp above it had been sulking since before the war. The rain had come back after dark. It ran down the black glass in long threads, and the sound of it filled the alcove, and the whole of the library beyond was reduced to the occasional distant scrape of a chair. She had 11 books open around her in a half-circle. Every one of them was about Pediculus Cordis, and every one of them said the same 3 sentences in slightly different Latin, and not one of them said how long, or how to stop, or what to do with your hands. The chair opposite her was pulled out. She did not need to look up. The bell had already told her. Draco sat down without being invited, put a single book on the table, and did not open it. He folded his hands. He had a silver ring on his right forefinger, and he turned it once with his thumb, and the small sound of metal against metal was very loud in the alcove. "You've been following me," he said. Hermione's head came up. "I have not. 3rd floor, yesterday, twice. That is the route to astronomy. You don't take astronomy." He said it without heat, which was worse than heat. "You came up the stair, you saw me, you turned around, and you went back down. Then 20 minutes later, you did it again. I watched you do it, Granger. So did half the corridor." The lamp hissed. Rain hammered the broken sash. "I'm not following you," Hermione said, very quietly. "I'm trying to work out where you are so that I can be somewhere else." That got him. She saw it, a small flinch at the corner of his mouth, quickly disciplined. "Then you're extraordinarily bad at it." "Yes," she said. "I've noticed." He looked at the ring on his hand and turned it again. "What did she call it?" he said. "Pomfrey, the proper name. Pediculus cordis. And how long?" "She doesn't know. The literature doesn't know. The literature—" Hermione put her palm flat on the nearest page and found that her voice had gone unsteady and hated it. "The literature is 4 centuries of men writing down amusing anecdotes about people they found ridiculous. There is no dosage. There is no antidote. There is a woodcut in this one of a man on his knees in a marketplace, and a caption that translates as "the wretch could not help himself," and that is the sum total of magical scholarship on the subject. The rain threaded down the glass. "It doesn't invent anything," Draco said. It was not a question. He had looked it up too then. Somewhere in the last 4 days, he had gone to a shelf and found the same 3 sentences and read them and understood exactly what they meant, and had said nothing, and had spent every hour since arranging his movements around her like a man stepping through a minefield. Hermione's throat closed. "No," she said, "it doesn't." She watched him absorb it. He did it without moving anything but his eyes, which came up off the ring and met hers, and for one suspended moment the whole alcove seemed to hold its breath. The rain, the sulking lamp, the cold blade of air from the broken sash, and something in his face began, very slightly, to open. Then it shut. "Right," he said, and stood up, and the chair legs shrieked against the floor. "Then let's be clear about something, Granger, because I'd rather do this once than watch you flinch your way through it for a month. Draco, there's a thing in your blood the size of a grain of rice." His voice was perfectly level and perfectly cold, and each word came down like a stone laid in a wall. "It has picked up gratitude. That's all it is. I carried you out of a wood. Your body decided that was significant, and now some parasite is reading the signal and turning it up. It isn't you. It doesn't mean anything. It has nothing whatsoever to do with me." "That isn't. So we will work the perimeter," he went on over her, "because Sprout will have us in detention until Christmas otherwise. And when the thing burns out of you, you will be spared having to look at me across a table and remember any of this, because there will be nothing to remember. It was a bite. Bites heal." He picked up his book. Hermione stood so fast that her chair went over backward and hit the floor with a crack that rolled out through the stacks like a dropped beam. "You don't get to do that," she said. He stopped. "You don't get to stand there and tell me what's in my own blood." Her hands were shaking. She flattened them against the table so he wouldn't see. "You have decided, in 4 days, without asking me a single question, that everything I've done this week is a symptom. It's very tidy. It's very convenient. And do you know why you've done it, Malfoy? Because if it's a symptom, you don't have to do anything about it. And the one thing you cannot bear is being handed something you haven't got a plan for. He had gone white to the lips. You have no idea, he said, what I can and cannot bear. Then tell me. No. Tell me. Because I have spent 4 days being humiliated by my own hands, and the only thing keeping me upright is that at least one of us is being honest, and it is not going to be. Because if I let myself believe you, he said, for 1 hour, for 1 minute, and then that thing dies out of you, and you wake up and look at me the way you looked at me for 7 years. He stopped. The rain filled the space where the rest of the sentence should have been. The lamp guttered and steadied. Somewhere far off, Madame Pince's footsteps went along a distant aisle and faded. And Hermione Granger, who had no control left of anything below her neck, watched her own hand rise from the table, cross the space between them, and close around his wrist. His pulse was going under her fingers like something trapped. That was the first thing Hermione registered. Not the shape of his wrist, not the cool of his skin against the heat of her palm, but the rate. Fast. Faster than a man standing still in a library had any business being. It beat against the pads of her fingers, quick and irregular, and it told her a great deal more than his mouth had. The second thing she registered was that she had not decided to do this. Let go, she instructed the hand. Let go now, immediately, while there is still a version of tomorrow in which we can both pretend. The hand held on. Draco did not pull away. That was the strange part, the part she would take out and turn over at 3 a.m. for days afterward. He stood absolutely still with his arm extended and her fingers closed around it, and he looked down at the place where they joined with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not disgust, not triumph, not the smooth, lacquered scorn he wore like a second coat. Something closer to bewilderment. The look of a man who has put his hand into a dark drawer and found it warm. Granger. His voice had gone rough at the edges. Let go. I'm trying. Try harder. Do you imagine, she said, and her own voice cracked embarrassingly in the middle, that I have not been trying? For 4 days? Every waking hour? Do you think this is pleasant for me? His eyes came up. No, he said, I don't. And then he did the thing that undid her. He reached across with his free hand, took hold of her fingers, and opened them one by one. Gently, deliberately. The way you would open a child's fist around something it shouldn't have. He lifted her hand off his wrist and set it back down on the table, on the page of the open book, and he kept his own hand over it for perhaps half a second longer than the operation required. Then he stepped back out of reach. 10 o'clock, he said. Pince will lock the doors. He picked up his book, and this time he made it to the end of the aisle before he stopped. He didn't turn round. He stood there with the lamplight behind him and the rain running down the black window, and said to the shelves, For what it's worth, I haven't looked at you the way I looked at you for 7 years in a very long time. Then he was gone, and the alcove was enormous, and Hermione sat down on the floor beside her overturned chair because her legs had stopped participating. Astoria Greengrass arrived on the 11th day of November, in the middle of luncheon, with rain on the shoulders of a travelling cloak the colour of old moss. She was not a student. That was the first thing everyone noticed. She came in through the great doors with the confidence of a woman who had written ahead, spoke briefly to Professor McGonagall at the high table, and then crossed the whole length of the hall to the Slytherin bench, where she put one hand on Draco Malfoy's shoulder from behind and said something into his ear that made him close his eyes. Hermione's soup went cold in front of her. "That's the Greengrass girl," said Ginny with interest. "The younger one. Daphne's sister. She was 2 years below us. She left in 5th year. Something about her health." Said Hermione. "Mother's a Selwyn. Very old blood. Very poor old blood, actually, which is the interesting part." Ginny propped her chin on her hand. "Mum said there was a talk in the summer. Narcissa Malfoy's been writing letters." "Letters?" "Letters, Hermione. The kind with a seal on them and a list of terms inside." Ginny made a small, expressive gesture with her spoon. "Half the old families are doing it. There aren't enough of them left to be fussy anymore, and after the trials nobody will touch a Malfoy who hasn't got a Greengrass or a Fawley standing next to him. It's not a marriage. It's a... what's the word? A rehabilitation." The bell under Hermione's collarbone had stopped ringing. It had done something else instead. It had gone tight and hot and low, a coal banked under the sternum, and she was aware of a sensation in her jaw that she had felt perhaps 3 times in her life. Most recently in the moment before she struck Draco Malfoy across the face in the 3rd year. "Oh no," she thought. "No, no, no, not this. Anything but this." Because she could feel it arriving. She could feel it coming up through her like water up a wick, and every rational sentence she flung at it went through it without resistance. "You have no claim. You have no right. You have known about this for 11 seconds, and you are behaving like a woman betrayed." And none of it mattered. And her face was already doing something. She could feel her face doing something. Down the hall, Astoria swung her leg over the bench and sat down beside him. She was slight and dark-haired and pale in a way that suggested illness handled with great elegance, and when she laughed at something Theo Knott said, the sound of it carried a low, cool, unhurried laugh, the laugh of a woman entirely at home. She put her hand on Draco's forearm. Hermione stood up. The bench scraped. Half the Gryffindor table looked round. Ginny said, "Hermione," and Hermione did not hear her because she was already walking and she had no destination, and her only clear thought was get out, get out, get out, before your face finishes what it is doing. She was 6 steps from the doors when she made the error of looking back. He was watching her, not Astoria. Astoria was still talking, her hand still resting on his sleeve. Draco had turned in his seat, and his whole attention was fixed on Hermione Granger crossing the great hall at speed, and she was too far away to read his expression, and she was close enough to see that his hand had closed around the stem of his goblet, hard enough to press the metal out of round. She found the courtyard because it was the only place with weather in it. It was the small cloistered one on the west side, unfinished, half its arcade still wrapped in canvas and scaffolding poles that hummed faintly with a binding charm. Rain came down through the open middle in a fine cold veil. There was a stone bench, slick and black with wet, and Hermione sat on it and let the rain go through her jumper and put her face in her hands. Jealousy. She made herself say the word internally, in full, because refusing to name a thing was the coward's method, and she had never been a coward about anything except this. You are jealous, not offended on principle, not disapproving of arranged matches on feminist grounds, though you do. You are jealous of a woman who put her hand on his arm, and you would like to remove it, and the bug did not put that there, because the bug cannot put anything anywhere. It only lifts the lid. How long? She demanded of herself savagely. How long has this been in the box? And her memory, which had always been the most obedient servant she owned, and had now apparently gone over to the enemy, offered up its inventory without being asked. The manor drawing room, and a boy's face gone the colour of candle wax, and his mouth shaping, I don't know, I can't be sure, when he had known perfectly well. The room of requirement and fire, and a hand grabbing hers to haul her upright when she'd have gone down under the smoke. 11 days on a ward line in a wet October wood, and a voice behind her saying, "You're setting them too deep," and the discovery, appalling at the time, unbearable now, that she had begun to look forward to being corrected. The rain got heavier. "You'll catch your death out here." She did not lift her head. "Go away. That bench has been under a leaking gutter since June." Footsteps on the flags, unhurried. "There's a dry section under the north arcade. I'm not going to carry you a second time, Granger. Once was more than enough exercise for one term." Hermione took her hands from her face. He was standing 3 yards away with the rain silvering his hair and running off the shoulders of his coat, and he had not put up a shield charm, which she noticed, and which she filed away with all the other things she was collecting and refusing to examine. "Does she know?" she said. He went very still. "Does who know what? Astoria Greengrass? Does she know that you spend your afternoons in a bog with a muggle-born, and that on the 3rd of the month you told me the depth of the anchor mast was wrong, because peat sits over granite, and that you have said perhaps 400 words to me in 11 days, and I have counted them?" Hermione heard her own voice climbing, and could not bring it down. "Does she know you carried me half a mile, and set me down as though I'd break? Does that go in the letters, Malfoy? Is there a clause?" "Stop. Because I would like to know the terms. Granger, stop. Since apparently everyone in this castle knows them but me. She's dying." The rain went on falling. Hermione's mouth was still open around the shape of the next word. She closed it. Draco had not raised his voice. He said it the way he said everything now, flatly, as though reading out a measurement, and that was somehow so much worse than shouting that she felt it land in her stomach like swallowed ice. "Blood curse," he said. Her mother's line. Her grandmother went at 31, and her great-aunt at 26, and Astoria is 22. And she came here today to tell me she's refusing the arrangement because she will not spend what she's got left as a piece of paperwork. He wiped rain off his face with the flat of his hand, once, roughly. "That's what she said into my ear at lunch, since you were watching, since apparently everyone was watching." Hermione put her hand over her mouth. "Don't. I'm sorry. I said don't." He turned away, then turned back, and there was something furious moving under the flat surface of him. "You want to know what she actually said?" She said, "Whatever you were looking at over my shoulder, Draco, you should go and look at it properly." Because she'd been sitting beside me for 4 minutes and I hadn't heard a word, and she noticed because she is not a fool, and now she has gone back to Wiltshire, and I am standing in the rain in a courtyard having this conversation. The scaffolding creaked in the wind. Water ran off the broken guttering in a rope and drummed on the flags. "So, no," he said. "There is no arrangement. There is no clause. There is nothing in any letter about you, and there will not be. And you may take that off the list of things you torture yourself with at night, since you clearly keep one." Hermione stood up off the bench. Her jumper was soaked through and heavy, and her hair had come down in ropes, and she could feel the cold in the bones of her hands, and none of it registered as anything but a distant report from a foreign country. "Why did you follow me out here?" "I didn't follow you. You crossed the entire hall. I was—" He stopped. "You were what?" And there it was, the flicker. She saw it go across his face like the shadow of a bird across a wall. He had come out here without a plan, and he was standing in a courtyard in November rain with no coat charm and no excuse, and no line prepared. And Draco Malfoy, without a line prepared, was a man she had met perhaps twice in 8 years. "You made a sound," he said at last. "When you stood up, before you walked out, you made a sound like someone had hit you and nobody else heard it, and I—" He raised one hand. She thought for a wild fraction of a second that he was going to touch her face. His hand came up between them, palm open, and stopped in the air perhaps 4 inches from her cheek, and hung there while the rain went through the space in between. Then his fingers curled, and the hand dropped, and he stepped back. "You should go inside," Draco said. "You're shaking." "That isn't the cold." "I know it isn't," he said, and the admission cost him something visible. "That's why you should go inside." The restricted section at 3 in the morning smelled of vellum and coal dust, and, very faintly, of the linseed oil the house elves used on the shelf runners. Hermione had been there since midnight. She had come with a candle in a saucer and a stack of parchment, and the particular grim energy of a woman who has decided to stop being a patient and start being a scholar. Around her, the aisles went up into darkness. The lamps at this hour were down to embers. The only real light was hers, a small trembling coin of it that made the gilt letters on the spine swim as she moved. "Everything I have read is a joke book," she had thought at the beginning. 4 centuries of anecdote. The wretch could not help himself. Nobody has done the work because nobody has ever taken it seriously. Because the affliction is funny. Because the sufferer is funny. Because a person who cannot hide what they feel is the oldest joke in the world. Fine. Then I shall do the work. She had gone at it the way she went at everything, from beneath. Not the folklore shelves, the parasitology. Not curious afflictions of the heart, but Meliora vermium and de parasitis animae, and a crumbling Portuguese octavo called Sanguessugas do Sentimento that she had to translate as she went, with her finger under each line and her lips moving. And at 11 minutes past 3, on page 406 of the Portuguese, she found it. She read the paragraph once and did not understand it. She read it a second time and understood it and did not believe it. She read it a third time with her hand flat on the page as though it might get away, and the candle guttered, and the words held still, and they said what they had said the first time. Pediculus cordis did not choose its host at random. It was a threshold organism. It could not attach, could not even take, where there was insufficient material. The bite required a substrate, a settled, established affection of a certain minimum density, already present in the blood of the person it landed on, already carried, already old. The parasite was not a cause. It was a diagnosis. It went where the feeling was, and it fed on the effort of concealment, which was why it produced the symptom it produced. It ate the lid off the box, because the lid was the food. And beneath that, in a smaller hand, the author had added the sentence that stopped Hermione's breath entirely. The vermin cannot survive the utterance. Where the host speaks the affection plainly, aloud, of their own volition, and to the one it belongs to, the organism finds nothing further to consume and expires within the day. All other remedies are palliative. There is no cure but the saying of it. She sat back. The candle threw her shadow up the shelves, enormous and wavering, of their own volition, not blurted, not forced out by a hand she couldn't govern or a face that wouldn't behave, chosen. The one thing the bite had taken from her was the one thing required to be rid of it, and there was a cruelty in that so exquisite, so beautifully constructed, that Hermione put both hands over her mouth and laughed. One short, silent, appalled breath. Already old, she thought. Already carried. And there it was, the sentence she had been running from since the 4th of November, standing in the middle of the aisle with its arms folded. You did not fall in love with Draco Malfoy in a hospital bed. The bug found something. You have been carrying it for months, and you built a very good box, and you were extremely proud of the box, and a thing the size of a grain of rice came out of a wood in October and ate it. Behind her, a floorboard shifted. She did not turn. She knew the quality of that silence by now, the particular way the air changed, the low ringing under the collarbone that had become as familiar and as unwelcome as her own heartbeat. "You're in the restricted section," Draco said, "at 3 a.m, without a pass." "So are you." "I have a pass." A pause. "Slughorn gives them out like sweets if you look thin enough." He came and stood at her shoulder. She felt him arrive, the displacement of air, the faint cedar and cold stone smell of him, the heat of a body a foot from her back. He did not sit. He put one hand on the table beside her open book, fingers spread, the silver ring catching the candle, and he leaned in slightly, and Hermione understood with perfect horror what was about to happen, and did not have the presence of mind to close the book. He read it. She could hear him doing it. She could hear the change in his breathing at the 3rd line, and the small, dry sound he made in his throat at the 6th, and then nothing at all, which meant he had reached the sentence in the smaller hand. The candle burned. Somewhere below them, the castle settled with a long wooden groan. Say something, Hermione thought. Say anything. Say it's rubbish. Say the Portuguese is unreliable. Say it's a mistranslation. Say the word I've rendered as affection could equally mean obligation. Say something that lets me stand up from this table. "It's a threshold organism," Draco said. His voice was very quiet and entirely without inflection, and it came from about 4 inches above her right ear. "Yes. It can't take where there's nothing to take. That's what it says." which means when it landed on you in that wood. He stopped. She heard him swallow. Which means it was already there, before the forest, before I carried you anywhere. Hermione closed her eyes. Yes, she said. The word went out into the dark aisles and did not come back. She waited. She had constructed, in the 4 seconds available, a small anthology of the things he might say. The cruel one, the disbelieving one, the one where he laughed. And she braced for all of them at once, which meant she was braced for none of them when he did what he actually did. He took his hand off the table. That was all. He straightened up and stepped back, and the warmth at her shoulder went away, and the air where he'd been was suddenly cold. Malfoy. There's a copy of the Portuguese in the Manor Library, he said. 3rd edition. My grandfather annotated it. I never read past the fish. Malfoy. You should go to bed. Pince does a round at 4 and she checks the tables. You are not going to walk away from this. I am, actually. He was already turning. I'm going to walk away from this, and you're going to let me, and tomorrow neither of us is going to mention that this conversation happened. Hermione stood up. Why? Because the alternative is I stay. Then stay. And say what? He rounded on her, and the candle flame bent with the movement, and for one instant she saw his whole face lit from below. The shadows under the eyes, the mouth held hard, the tendons standing out in his neck. What is it you imagine I'd say, Granger? Go on. You've clearly got it drafted. I haven't got anything drafted. You've got everything drafted. You draft in your sleep. His voice dropped and got worse. You want me to tell you that I've thought about it? Fine. I've thought about it. I've thought about it every day since the 4th of November, and a fair number of days before that, and I have been extremely careful. And do you know why? Tell me why. Because you can't say no. The words hit the table between them and lay there. You can't, he repeated. That's what the thing does. It's taken your, what did she call it? Your capacity to conceal. It's taken the wall. And a person without a wall can't consent to anything, Granger. They can only be true, which is not the same. And I know precisely what it looks like to take something from someone who isn't in a position to refuse it. His jaw worked. I have watched it done. In my own house. At my own table. So no. I am not going to be a man who stands in a library at 3 a.m. and takes advantage of a girl with a parasite in her blood. And if you think for 1 second that's restraint on your behalf. He stopped. Finish it, Hermione said. No. You said, if you think it's restraint on my behalf. Finish the sentence. The silence went on so long that the candle burned a full 1/4 inch of itself away. It isn't for you, Draco said. It's for me. Because if I let myself have any of it now, then for the rest of my life, I'd never know which part of it you meant. Hermione's hands were shaking again. She put them behind her back, gripped one wrist with the other, and held on. That's a very fine speech, she said. And every word of it is a reason. And reasons are the thing you build when you want to stand somewhere and not move. Granger, do you know what I found tonight? She reached out and turned the book around so it faced him and stabbed her finger at the smaller hand at the bottom of the page. I found out that the only way this ends is if I say it, out loud, deliberately, to the person it's about. That's the cure. There isn't another one. So you can stand there being enormously honourable about my compromised faculties, but the arithmetic is quite simple. Either I speak or I stay like this, and you have just informed me that anything I say while I'm like this is worthless to you. He looked at the page. She watched him read the last line again, and watched him arrive at the same trap she had arrived at, and watched the exact moment he saw the shape of it close around them both. "Yes," he said. "I know." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "I don't know." "That is not an answer." "I know it isn't." It came out of him at volume, and it rang off the stone, and both of them flinched at the size of it in that hushed and enormous room. He put a hand over his eyes and pressed, hard, and when he took it away he sounded exhausted. "I know it isn't. I have been turning it over for a week, and it doesn't come out. There's no arrangement of it where I get to be decent and you get to be free, and I've done the sums twice a night for 6 nights, and I cannot make them balance." Hermione stared at him. "6 nights," she said slowly. Draco went absolutely still. "You've been doing the sums for 6 nights. She came round the end of the table. "6 nights, Malfoy, since the 12th, which was the day in the courtyard, which means you went upstairs from that courtyard, soaked through, and you sat down and you started trying to find a way for this to be possible. Don't. Which is a rather remarkable amount of effort to expend on a symptom you told me had nothing whatsoever to do with you. Don't." He said it with his hand already raised, half turned toward the aisle, and it was not a command. It came out closer to a plea, and it stopped her more effectively than shouting could have done. The candle stood between them, burning steadily now, its small flame doubled in the black window at the end of the row. "I'm going to go," he said, "and I want you to understand that it is the single hardest thing I have done since the war." He walked to the end of the aisle. At the corner he stopped, one hand flat against the shelf end, his back to her, and he stood there long enough that Hermione took one involuntary step forward with her arm already lifting. "When it's gone," Draco said without turning round, "when it's out of your blood and the wall is back up and you can lie to me again if you want to, come and find me then, if you still want to, and I'll listen to every word." Then he was around the corner and gone, and she heard the far door close, and the candle guttered wildly in the draught and steadied, and Hermione Granger stood alone among the tall dark shelves with her hand still stretched out into the empty aisle. She brewed it in an abandoned classroom on the 4th floor, over 9 days, in a cauldron she had to scour twice because something had died in it during the war and nobody had come back for the pot. The recipe was not a cure. She had been scrupulous with herself about that, and she wrote it at the top of her working notes in capital letters so that she would not be able to pretend otherwise later. Dampener. Palliative only. Suppresses expression, not cause. Underneath it, she copied out the Portuguese author's own contemptuous phrase, "All other remedies are palliative," because a woman who lies to herself in her own notebook has no business calling herself a scholar. It came out of a monograph on Damocles Belby's early work, back before the wolfsbane, when he'd been trying to build a general-purpose affect sedative for St. Mungo's and had abandoned it as too blunt an instrument. Too blunt was exactly what she wanted. It took valerian and dittany and the pale inner rind of a moonseed, and it had to be stirred anti-clockwise for 11 minutes at a stretch, which was long enough to think, which was the only genuinely dangerous ingredient in the whole procedure. She thought a great deal over those 11-minute stretches. She thought about a boy standing at the end of an aisle with his hand flat on a shelf, saying, "Come and find me then," and about the fact that he had been perfectly, infuriatingly right, and that being right had cost him something she could hear in his voice. She thought about how it would feel to be able to sit opposite him at a table and not have her mouth do anything. She thought, and this was the part she did not write down, that if she could only get her face back, if she could only get her hands back, then she could go to him whole and choose and say the thing on purpose, and it would count. That was the plan. She was proud of the plan. It was elegant, and it was well reasoned, and it had a fatal flaw at its centre, which she did not discover until the 4th day of taking the potion, and by then she had stopped being the sort of person who noticed flaws. It tasted of aniseed and pond water. She took the first dose on a Thursday morning at 7:10, standing at the window of the 4th floor classroom with frost on the panes and the lake below going the colour of gunmetal, and for about 90 seconds nothing happened at all. Then it came down over her like snow over a field. There was no violence in it. That was what she had not expected. She had braced for something wrenching, and instead there was only a gradual, spreading quiet. The low ringing under her collarbone thinning out to nothing, the buzzing in her wrist smoothing flat, and behind her breastbone a sensation of enormous, temperate stillness, as though a room she had been living in for weeks had finally had its windows shut against a wind. Hermione put her hand on the cold glass and waited to feel relieved. She did not feel relieved. She did not feel anything much. She noted, with the detached interest of a woman reading a gauge, that the absence of relief was itself information, and then she went down to breakfast. The doors of the great hall opened at 8:20, and Draco Malfoy came in with rain on his shoulders. Hermione looked at him. Her face did not move. She was aware of it in a distant sort of way, that this was the man, that this was the person about whom there had been so much difficulty, and the awareness sat in her mind like a fact in a textbook. Draco Malfoy has entered the hall. He is wet. His hair needs cutting. She waited for her mouth to begin. She waited for the treacherous softening at the eyes. Nothing came. Her hands stayed exactly where she had put them, one around her cup and one flat on the table, obedient as trained dogs. It works, she thought. And underneath, so faint she could almost pretend not to have heard it. Oh. The thing about the potion, she discovered over the following days, was that it did not simply suppress the symptom. It could not. The parasite fed on the effort of concealment, so the dampener had to go beneath that, had to flatten the ground the effort stood on, and what it produced was not a woman controlling herself. It was a woman with nothing much to control. She became extremely efficient. She finished the arithmancy project 4 days early, and it was, McGonagall said, the most technically flawless piece of work she had received in a decade, and had she considered submitting it to the Institute. Hermione said that she had not, and would, and thank you, and did not experience the small hot flush of pleasure that had accompanied every piece of praise she had received since the age of 6. She went to the perimeter and set the anchor mast at 2.5 inches without being told, and finished her section and started his. She answered Ginny's questions in complete sentences and did not notice for 3 days that Ginny had stopped asking them. And on the 9th of December, she stood in the entrance hall while Neville told her, with his ears going red, that he'd asked Hannah Abbott to the winter thing, and that Hannah had said yes, and Hermione heard herself say, "That's very good news. Well done," in a tone so level and so pleasant and so completely uninhabited that Neville's face fell before he could stop it. "Right," he said. "Yes, thanks." She watched him walk away and thought, that was wrong. That was the wrong response. I know it was wrong. I can identify precisely which register the correct response should have occupied. And she could not, by any act of will available to her, feel why it mattered. Draco worked it out on the 12th day. They were on the perimeter in a hard blue cold, the ground iron underfoot, the whole forest edge rhymed white and utterly silent. That thick winter silence where sound goes into the frost and does not come back. The anchor mast had to be set before the deep freeze, or the whole autumn's work would be lost, and Sprout had them out there 4 hours a day now, and they had said perhaps 30 words to each other in a fortnight. He had been watching her for an hour. She was aware of it. It registered as data. "Your hands aren't cold," he said. Hermione looked up. "It's -4. Everyone's hands are cold." "You're not wearing gloves." He nodded at them. "You haven't worn gloves in 6 days. You used to complain about the cold for the first 20 minutes of every session since October, loudly, with reference to statistics about hypothermia." I stopped noticing it. "Yes," Draco said. "I know." Something in his voice made her sit back on her heels. He had gone very white, but then he was always white in this weather. She catalogued it and moved on. His breath came out in short, quick clouds. He was holding his trowel, and he was not using it. "Say my name," he said. "What?" "Say my name." "Malfoy. The other one." Hermione set down the seed pouch. "Draco." Nothing happened. She heard it herself. She heard the 2 syllables come out of her mouth flat and plain and unaccented, the way you would read a name off a delivery docket. And she watched what that did to his face, and she was capable of understanding exactly what it meant, and entirely incapable of minding. "What have you taken?" "A dampener." She picked up the pouch again. "Belby's, adapted, Valerian base. It doesn't touch the organism. It only suppresses the expressive." "What have you taken?" "I've just told you." He was across the frozen ground and crouched in front of her before she finished the sentence, close enough that she could see the pale rings around his pupils, and he took hold of her chin. Actually, took hold of it, thumb and forefinger, and turned her face up into the flat white light. She let him. That was the thing. She let him do it and felt nothing at all. "Look at me." "I am looking at you." "No, you aren't." He said it very low. "You're pointing your eyes at me. There's a difference, and I have spent 7 weeks becoming an expert in it." That's an emotive way of describing ocular focus. Draco let go of her chin as though it had burned him. He stood up. He walked 4 paces away across the white ground and stood with his back to her and both hands laced behind his head, and Hermione watched the muscles of his shoulders working under the coat and thought with mild professional interest that he appeared to be having some difficulty. "Take it out," he said. "Take what out?" "Whatever's in you. Stop taking it. Today." "That's a remarkable thing for you to say." She stood and brushed the frost from her knees. "You spent the whole of November explaining to me that nothing I did while I was bitten could possibly mean anything, because I couldn't refuse it. Well, now I can. I have the wall back. I can lie to you again if I want to. Those were your words in the restricted section on the 19th. So by every criterion you set out, this is the version of me you asked for." He turned round. "This is not the version I asked for." "It is precisely the version you asked for. It is a corpse, Granger." The word went out across the frozen ground and hung there in the cold, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, and somewhere back in the trees a branch cracked under its own weight of ice and fell. "You said, 'That's very good news. Well done,' to Longbottom," Draco said. "I was standing 8 feet away. He just told you he was taking Abbott to the winter thing, and he looked like he'd been slapped, and you didn't see it. You didn't see it. 2 months ago, you'd have shrieked loud enough to bring down the scaffolding and hugged him hard enough to break a rib." His voice had begun to come apart at the edges. "You handed McGonagall a piece of work she called the best in 10 years, and your face did nothing. You have been out here for 4 hours a day for a fortnight, in this, without gloves, and you haven't once told me I'm wrong about anything." "You haven't been wrong about anything." "I have been wrong about everything, all week deliberately," he said. "I set the last 9 seeds at 4 inches. 4, the depth out of babbling. The one you got wrong in October, the one you were furious about for 3 days. I set 9 of them wrong in a row where you could see me do it, and you walked past every single one." Hermione looked down the line at the small, disturbed patches of frozen earth. She could see it, now that she was looking. The spacing was wrong too. He had done it badly on purpose, and she had walked the length of it twice. "Oh," she said. "Oh. That's an appalling waste of anchor mast." Draco made a sound that was not a laugh. "Do you know what I have been doing for a fortnight?" he said. "I have been standing in a freezing wood, ruining a warding line like a lunatic, trying to provoke a single reaction out of you, and getting nothing, and going back to the castle every evening and sitting on the end of my bed with my coat still on for an hour. And the joke, the genuinely funny part, Granger, you'll appreciate this, it's got a proper structure, is that this is exactly what I said I wanted. I stood in that library and I told you I couldn't take anything from you until you had the wall back. So you built one. You built the best wall anyone has ever built, out of Valerian, in 9 days, because you are the most terrifyingly capable person I have ever met." He stopped. He was breathing hard. There was frost in his hair. "And I would burn it down with my hands," he said, "if I could reach it." Hermione stood in the white silence and looked at him. Somewhere far beneath the pond-water flatness, at a depth she could locate but not reach, something turned over in its sleep. One slow movement, like a body shifting under heavy blankets, and was still again. She noted it. She filed it. She said, in a voice as smooth and as level as the frozen ground between them, "You've let your hands go numb. You should put your gloves back on before you lose the use of them." The winter thing was held in the Great Hall on the 19th of December, and somebody had made the decision to leave the scaffolding up and hang it with lanterns instead. It was, Hermione noted, an aesthetically effective solution. 200 small glass lamps had been strung along the poles and cross braces of the north wall, and the canvas sheeting had been taken down so that the raw new stone showed pale and unfinished behind the light. The enchanted ceiling had been persuaded into a hard, clear frost sky, and the fires had been built up at both ends, and the whole room smelled of hot spiced wine and pine resin, and the particular dry mineral smell of fresh mortar in a warm room. She observed all of it accurately, and none of it landed anywhere. She had come because Ginny had stood in the doorway of the dormitory with her arms folded and said, "You are coming," and because argument required a motive, and Hermione had not had a motive about anything for 11 days. She had put on a dress of dark green wool because it was the warmest thing she owned. She had done her hair because it was untidy. She stood now near the second fire with a cup of wine going cold in her hand, and she watched the room the way one watches weather through a window. Neville and Hannah went past, laughing. Hermione registered that this was pleasant. Somewhere behind her, Seamus was attempting a charm involving the lanterns that would end badly. Luna had come as a guest and was wearing something with actual snow falling inside it. I should be delighted, Hermione thought, with clinical accuracy. This is the first Christmas since the castle was rebuilt. There are people in this room who very nearly did not live to stand in it. 18 months ago, the floor I am standing on was under 3 feet of rubble, and I was on my knees on it. The correct response to this evening is to weep and then dance until my feet hurt. She drank some of the cold wine. She had, in the last 11 days, begun keeping a private ledger of these moments, the ones where she could see with total clarity the shape of the feeling she ought to be having and could not get to it. The list was long. It had started as an experiment. Somewhere around the 7th day, it had stopped being an experiment and become a kind of accounting of loss, kept by a woman who could not feel the loss and therefore recorded it in a very neat hand. The doors were open. Cold came off the entrance hall in a slow river across the flagstones. Draco Malfoy was standing near them with Theo Knott and Pansy Parkinson and a group of 6th years, and he had been standing there for 40 minutes, and he had looked at Hermione 4 times, and she had counted, which was interesting, because counting was not a thing she had decided to do. At 9:30, Pansy raised her voice. It was not directed at anyone in particular. That was the style of the thing. Pansy had always had a knack for cruelty that arrived like weather, general and impersonal, so that nobody could quite be said to have been struck by it. She was holding forth about the winter thing, and the guest list, and the astonishing spectacle of Longbottom on a dance floor. And then she said, with the sweetest possible timing, "And, of course, the great romance of the year, Draco and his little research project. He's out in that bog with her 4 hours a day, you know. 4 hours. In December. Some people would call it penance, but I've always thought there was a fetish in it somewhere." There was a laugh, not from Draco. Hermione turned round. Afterward, she would take this moment apart 100 times, and every time she would arrive at the same finding. She did not lose control. That was the whole horror of it. Under the bite, she had done a dozen humiliating things, and every one of them had been involuntary, and every one of them had been warm. This was neither. She crossed the 8 feet of floor with her wine still in her hand, and she made a series of entirely deliberate choices at a temperature of absolute 0, and she watched herself make them. "Pansy," she said pleasantly. "That's very good, but you've aimed it at the wrong person." The group went quiet in the way groups do. "Sorry?" "You said it to make him uncomfortable, and it did. Look at his hand." Hermione did not look at his hand. She was looking at Pansy. "But you don't actually want to wound him, because you've been in love with him since 4th year, and everyone including him has known it since 4th year, and the whole architecture of your public personality is a machine for making that fact look like a joke you're telling on purpose." Somebody said Merlin very quietly. Pansy's face did an extraordinary thing. It flushed and emptied at the same time. "You want it to be a fetish," Hermione went on in the same reasonable tone. "Because if it's a fetish, then it's beneath him, and if it's beneath him, then it's temporary, and if it's temporary, then there's a version of the next 10 years where he notices you. There isn't. He has never once in 8 years noticed you. And you know that, which is why you say things like that at parties instead of at breakfast, because at breakfast there's nobody to laugh." The silence that followed had a shape to it. It went out through the group and hit the wall of noise from the rest of the hall and came back. Pansy Parkinson opened her mouth and shut it and put down her glass and walked out of the great hall very fast with her chin up. Hermione watched her go and felt nothing. That was the datum. That was the fact she would carry out of the room and up 4 flights of stairs and into every hour of the following days. She had just done the cruelest thing she had ever done in her life, with surgical accuracy in front of 30 people, and internally there was no sound at all, not satisfaction, not shame. A flat white field with the wind going over it. She turned back and found Draco looking at her. He had gone the colour of the new mortar. Theo had taken a step away from him. And what was in his face was not anger. She could identify anger. She'd spent 7 years cataloguing his angers. It was something much quieter and much worse, and she was capable of naming it and not of being touched by it. "Well," Hermione said, "she shouldn't have said it." "No," said Draco, "she shouldn't." "Then I don't see the difficulty." He set his glass down on the ledge of the nearest scaffolding pole. His hand, she observed, was not entirely steady. "Come outside," he said. The courtyard was the same one. She noted the symmetry without deriving anything from it. The rain of November had frozen into December. The flags were treacherous with black ice, and the canvas that had hung from the arcade in autumn was gone, and above them the open middle showed the same hard frost sky that the ceiling had been imitating. It was appallingly cold. The lantern light and the noise came out through the door behind them in a long, warm wedge, and then stopped at the edge of the arcade as though it had hit glass. Draco walked to the middle and stood there with his back to her. "That was true," he said. "Every word of it. That's the thing I want you to understand before we go any further. You didn't make anything up. Pansy has been in love with me since 4th year, and I have never noticed her, and she does it at parties. It was all true. Then, it was surgical." He turned round. You went in, and you found the one thing that would take her apart, and you took her apart with it, in front of 30 people, in under a minute. That girl will remember tonight when she is 60, and you are standing there with your hands in your pockets, asking me where the difficulty is. She insulted you, Hermione said, publicly, in a manner calculated to humiliate. I responded proportionately, using accurate information, and the response was effective. If you would like me to apologize to her tomorrow, I will do that. I'll write it down first so I get the register right. Draco put both hands over his face. He stood like that for some seconds. When he took them away, he had stopped looking angry and started looking frightened, which he registered as the more significant development. You'd write it down, he said, to get the register right. Yes. Granger, do you hear yourself? I hear myself perfectly. I have heard myself for 11 days. And here, for the first time, something moved under the ice. Not a feeling, but the outline of one, the way a shape moves under a frozen pond. I have a list. Would you like to hear the list? I have kept a list of every moment in 11 days where I could identify precisely the emotion that the situation required and could not produce it. It is 4 pages long. It is in my handwriting, which has not changed at all, which I find the most frightening item on it. Then stop taking it. I will stop taking it, Hermione said, when I have understood what I am without it. You know what you are without it. Do I? She took a step forward on the black ice. I have been legible for 7 weeks, Malfoy. Every person in this castle has been able to read my face like a notice board. You told me in that library that you couldn't take anything from me until I had the wall back. So I built the wall, and I came out here tonight, and I discover that what's behind the wall is somebody who can end a girl's life at a party and go back to her wine. That is not what's behind the wall. How do you know? Because I have watched you, he said, and his voice cracked straight down the middle of it. For 7 weeks, since the 4th of November, I have watched you fight that thing every hour of every day and lose, and be humiliated by your own hands, and get up the next morning and go back out to the perimeter and do it again. Do you know what that looked like from where I was standing? It looked like the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do. And what you did in there tonight was not you. It was the absence of you, in your shape, using your vocabulary. The cold came down through the open middle of the courtyard. Hermione stood on the ice and looked at him, and did not feel her eyes sting, and understood, with a kind of far-off academic sorrow, that they ought to have. I did it for you, she said. I know. That's what I want on the record. I brewed it so that I could get my hands back, so that I could stand in front of you with the wall up and say the thing on purpose, so that it would count. That was the plan. It was a good plan. Her voice did not rise, did not do anything at all. And the flaw in it. I have located the flaw. It took me 11 days. The flaw is that the potion doesn't only take the expression, it takes the ground the expression stands on. So I have the wall now, and I can absolutely say the words, and I could say them to you this minute in perfect order, and there would be nothing behind them. She saw that land. Say something, she said after a while. You've gone quiet. In November you shouted. Draco looked at her across 4 feet of black ice with a lantern light coming out of the door in a long, warm wedge behind him, and he did not shout, and he did not step forward. "I'm not going to ask you to come off it," he said. "I want to. I've wanted to since the wood. But if I ask you, and you do it because I asked, then I've done exactly the thing I swore I wouldn't do, and I will have taken the last decision you've got left." He drew a breath that shook. "So, I'm going to go back inside, and I'm going to find Pansy, and I'm going to sit with her for an hour, because somebody should. And you can stand out here in the cold with your list." He walked past her. At the door he stopped, half in the warm light, and spoke without turning round. "On the 4th of November, you touched my hand in a hospital bed," Draco said. "You didn't mean to, and you couldn't stop, and you were mortified. I have thought about it every single day since. And I would rather have 4 seconds of that than 11 days of whatever this is. And I am fully aware of what admitting that costs me, and I'm saying it anyway, out here, where there's nobody to hear it but you." Then the door closed, and the wedge of light went out, and Hermione Granger was alone in a frozen courtyard with her perfectly steady hands. She poured the rest of it down the drain in the 4th floor washroom at 20 past midnight, and she did it standing up in her party dress, with the green wool still smelling of wood smoke and spiced wine. There were 2 full files, and most of a third. The liquid went out of them slow and grey, and left a film on the porcelain, and the smell that came up, aniseed and pond water, turned her stomach in a way that it had not turned it in 11 days. And Hermione stood gripping the edge of the basin and understood, with a slow, horrified interest, that the turning of her stomach was itself the first symptom of return. It took 19 hours. They came back in the wrong order. That was the thing nobody had written down anywhere, because nobody had ever bothered to study what happened when you stopped. She had expected a tide, one smooth incoming warmth, the room refilling. What she got was a demolition. Irritation arrived first, at about 2 in the morning, a hot, prickling impatience at the sound of Parvati breathing 4 beds away, so disproportionate and so unlovely that she got up and went and sat on the cold stone of the window ledge in the stairwell rather than be near anyone. Grief came at 4. It came without a subject. She sat on the ledge with her arms round her knees and wept for 11 minutes at nothing whatsoever, at the shape of the stairs, at the fact of December, and it went through her and left her scoured and shaking. Shame came at 9:30 the next morning in the great hall, and it came with a subject, and the subject was Pansy Parkinson. She was sitting with her porridge untouched when it hit. It went in under the ribs like a blade slipped between 2 staves of a barrel, and she heard her own voice from the night before. "There isn't. He has never once, in 8 years, noticed you." And she put down her spoon and gripped the edge of the table with both hands and stayed absolutely still for a full minute while it went through her. I said that. I chose every word of it. I selected the exact place to put it. At the Slytherin table, Pansy was sitting with her back very straight and was not eating either. Hermione stood up. It was, she would think later, possibly the longest walk she had taken in her life. The whole width of the great hall in front of 200 people on a Sunday morning, with the lanterns still strung dark and cold along the scaffolding from the night before. conversation dropped away in a wave as she went. She reached the Slytherin bench and stood there, and her face was doing everything now, all of it unshuttered, the flush climbing her throat, her mouth unsteady, her eyes wet and stinging, and she made no attempt whatsoever to stop it. Pansy! Pansy Parkinson looked up with her chin set for a fight. I was cruel to you last night, Hermione said. I was accurate, which made it worse. I used something you can't help against you in front of 30 people to win an argument I could have won by walking away, and it was the worst thing I have ever done to anyone, and I am sorry. I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm telling you in the same room where I did it. The silence held. Pansy's eyes had gone bright and furious. You've been on something. Yes. And now you're off it. Since midnight. Well, said Pansy after a long moment, and her voice was not steady either. You're a great deal more tolerable as a mess, Granger. Go away. Hermione went. And she was 3 steps from the doors when the bell under her collarbone rang. Once, low, sweet, and unmistakable. And she stopped dead in the middle of the entrance hall with her hand pressed flat to her sternum, because it had come back, all of it, every ounce, and it had not diminished by a single grain in 11 days of burial. Oh, she thought, there you are. She found him at 4 o'clock on the north scaffolding in the rain. The frost had broken overnight into that particular filthy December weather where everything runs. The gutters going, the flags shining black, the lake below invisible behind a wall of grey. He was 3 levels up on the exterior staging of the North Tower, alone, working the pointing between the new stones with a trowel and a wand, because Sprout's perimeter and Flitwick's masonry had been the 2 conditions of his return, and he did them both without complaint and mostly out of sight. Hermione climbed. The ladder was slick under her hands, and the wind came round the tower shoulder in gusts that flattened her coat against her legs, and by the 2nd level her palms were burning, and she did not slow down. He heard her on the boards and turned. Get down, he said, immediately. No. Granger, the staging on this side isn't finished. It's tied off at the 3rd stanchion, and the whole... I came off it, she said. He stopped. The rain came down between them. It ran off the scaffold poles in fine threads, and off the tail of his hair and down the back of her neck, and she stood at the top of the ladder with her hands raw and her chest heaving, and watched him understand. When? Midnight. 19 hours. Her voice was shaking. She let it. It came back wrong way round. Anger first, then a great deal of crying about absolutely nothing. Then Pansy. I apologized to her at breakfast in front of the entire hall, and she told me to go away, which was correct of her. She laughed, and it came out cracked. And then I was standing in the entrance hall, and it rang. Draco. It rang exactly as loud as it did on the 4th of November, and I have spent 11 days believing that if I buried it deep enough, it would have shrunk. And it hasn't shrunk. It hasn't shrunk at all. Stop. So I came up here to tell you. Stop. He crossed the boards in 3 strides and caught hold of her upper arms, and the grip was hard enough to hurt, and she understood that it was not the grip of a man taking hold of something, but of a man stopping something. Don't. Not up here. Not now. Not like this. Why? Because you're still bitten. His face was streaming. You came off the potion 19 hours ago, and the mark is still on your wrist, and I know it is, because I have looked at it every day since October. Nothing has changed, Granger. Nothing. You are exactly where you were on the 4th of November, except now you've had 11 days of being buried alive, and you're frightened, and you're running on the first thing that felt like anything. I'm not. You are. You're doing what people do when they come out of the dark. You're running at the nearest light, and it happens to be me. And if I let you say it now, I will spend the rest of my life not knowing whether it was me or the dark. His voice went to pieces on the last word. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I want it. That's not in question. It has not been in question for a very long time. But I need it to be a decision and not a symptom, and you are still carrying the thing in your blood. Hermione took hold of his wrists, deliberately, slowly. She looked down at her own hands doing it, and then up at him, and she said, "Watch." And she let go. Her hands came off him and dropped to her sides and stayed there. And she stood in the rain 3 levels above the courtyard and kept them there. And she counted 5 seconds out loud. "There," she said. "Did you see that? My hands are mine. They have been mine since I stopped, and I have not touched you once in 19 hours. And I have been standing here for 4 minutes, wanting to so badly that my teeth ache." Draco's face broke. There was no other word for it. Something went out of the set of his jaw and out of the line of his shoulders all at once, and he made a sound that was nearly a laugh and nothing like one, and he turned away and put both hands on the scaffold rail and leaned on it hard. "That isn't the point," he said. "It's precisely the point." "It is not, because the book doesn't say the thing stops your hands. It says it stops your concealment, and how the hell would either of us know the difference from up here?" He rounded on her. "You want me to take the risk." "I know. I have wanted to take it since the courtyard in November, and every time I get close to it, I hear my father at that table." He stopped himself. The rain filled it. "Say it," Hermione said. "No." "Draco." I said no. He wiped his face with the flat of his hand, roughly the same gesture as the courtyard, and she thought, I have known this man for 8 years, and I have only known that gesture for 7 weeks. It doesn't matter. What matters is that there is one clean way through this, and we both read it in the same paragraph in November. The thing dies when you say it, out loud, on purpose, to the person it's about. So, there's your test. There's the only test either of us will ever accept. He held her eyes. Wait. Wait until it's out of your blood. Properly out. Not suppressed. Out. And then come to me. And I will be there. I have been there since October. I'm not going anywhere. I have nowhere else in the world to be. That's circular, Hermione said, very quietly. You do see that it's circular. It only leaves when I say it, and you won't hear it until it's left. Yes. So you're asking me to wait for a thing that can only be ended by doing the thing you're asking me to wait for. Yes, said Draco. I know. I've known since the 19th of November. I told you I couldn't make the sums balance, and I have not managed it since. Hermione stood on the wet boards with the rain going down her collar and looked at him. And something in her, something that had been buried for 11 days under valerian and moonseed and was now awake and furious and entirely, gloriously ungoverned, said very clearly in a voice she recognized as her own. Then, break the circle. He's given you the rule. He hasn't got the authority to enforce it." "No," she said. Draco blinked. "No, what?" "No, I won't wait." She stepped forward. He stepped back and came up against the rail. "You have spent 7 weeks constructing a set of conditions under which it would be safe for you to be loved, and you have built them beautifully, and they are airtight, and they cannot ever be satisfied, and I do not think that is an accident." She was shaking all over now, and her face was doing everything, and she did not care. "You are not protecting me. You are making certain that you never have to find out." "That is not." "Then look at me and tell me you don't want to hear it." "Granger, look at me and say it." He looked at her. The rain came down between them, and 3 levels below the gutters ran, and somewhere inside the tower a door slammed in the wind. His hands were white on the rail behind him. His mouth opened. And Hermione Granger, standing on wet scaffolding in the last of a December afternoon, entirely in possession of every muscle she owned, took the front of his coat in both fists and said, "Draco, I love you. I have loved you since October, and probably since the fire, and nothing in my blood put it there, and I am saying it on purpose." For a moment, nothing happened at all. The rain went on falling. The gutters went on running 3 levels below. Her fists stayed closed in the wet wool of his coat, and Draco Malfoy stood pinned against the scaffold rail with his hands white on the pole behind him, and looked down at her, and did not move, and did not speak, and the silence stretched out until Hermione began to be genuinely afraid. "He's going to take my hands off his coat," she thought. "He's going to open my fingers one at a time, the way he did in the library, and set them down somewhere, and be very kind about it, and I shall have to go down that ladder." "Say something," she said. "I can't." "You can. You're extremely articulate. It's one of the 2 worst things about you." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but the wreckage of one. "You said it," Draco said. "Yes. On purpose. On purpose. Aloud. To you. With my hands entirely under my own management until approximately 4 seconds ago, at which point I made a decision." Her voice had gone thin and reckless. "Which is, I believe, the whole of the specification." He shut his eyes. "Granger, if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and I have made an idiot of myself on a ladder in the rain, and I will go down it, and we will never speak of it, and I will still have meant every word." She tightened her grip. "I want that on the record too. Whatever happens in the next minute, it doesn't touch what I just said. The bug doesn't get a vote on whether I meant it. It only ever got a vote on whether I could hide it." And then it began. It started under the collarbone, where the bell had lived since November. A sudden, enormous ringing, so loud and so bodily that Hermione gasped and swayed. Draco's hands came off the rail and caught her at the elbows. The ringing swelled and swelled until it was not a bell at all, but a single sustained note going through the whole cage of her ribs, and then it broke all at once, like ice going out of a river. The heat left her chest. It went down her arm. She felt it travel, the same route it had taken on the 4th of November, but reversed, shoulder to elbow to the inside of the wrist. And it gathered there in a point of appalling brightness, and for 1 second the small blue mark on her wrist burned white. Then it went out. There was a sound, very small, like a pin dropped onto silk, and the mark was gone. Hermione stared at her own wrist. The skin was clean and unmarked and faintly pink from the cold, and there was nothing there at all. Not a scar, not a discoloration, nothing but the ordinary blue thread of the vein beneath. "Oh," she said. Her knees went. Draco caught her, properly this time, one arm behind her back and the other under her elbow, taking her weight against him on the wet boards. And she leaned her forehead against the sodden front of his coat and started, disgracefully, to laugh. "It's gone. I know. It's gone, Draco. Look, it's gone. It did what the Portuguese said. 400 years of anecdote and one line in a footnote, and it's the only true thing anybody ever wrote about it. Granger. And you were standing right there when it happened, so you can't tell me the timing was... Hermione!" She stopped. He had never once used it. Not in 8 years. Not through the war, not on the perimeter, not in the library at 3 a.m, with her name a weapon in his mouth. She lifted her head off his chest and found that he had gone completely white, and that his eyes were red-rimmed, and that his hand had come up to the side of her face and was hovering there, half an inch away, exactly as it had in the courtyard in November. This time it did not fall. His fingers touched her cheekbone. Just that, cold fingertips against wet skin, tentative as a man testing whether a thing is real. And then his palm settled along her jaw, and his thumb moved once, slowly, across the bone beneath her eye, wiping away rain or something else. And Hermione heard her own breath go out of her in pieces. "Say it again," he said. "I love you. Again. I love you, and you have been unbearable about it for 7 weeks." He kissed her. There was nothing careful in it. That was what undid her. She had braced for hesitation, for something formal and terrified, and instead he came down onto her mouth like a man who had been holding a door shut with his shoulder for a very long time, and had finally, gratefully let it go. His hand slid back into her wet hair. The other arm closed around her and lifted so that her feet came half off the boards, and the scaffold pole was against her back, and his coat was cold and his mouth was not. And Hermione Granger stopped thinking in complete sentences for the first time in her documented life. She tasted rain on him. She tasted the cold. Somewhere under that there was tea, and something faintly bitter and green, anchor mast, ground into everything he owned since October. His hand fisted in her hair, and she made a sound against his mouth that she would be embarrassed about for years, and he answered it with one of his own, low and broken, and kissed her again, deeper, and the whole grey afternoon narrowed to the 4 square feet of wet board they were standing on. When they broke apart, she kept hold of his coat, because her hands had made that decision independently, and for once she was entirely in agreement with them. 7 weeks, he said, against her forehead. His breathing was wrecked. 7 weeks, and it was the saying of it. It was in the footnote the whole time. "I did tell you it was circular." "You did." "I said the arithmetic didn't work." "Hermione." "Yes?" "Stop being right for 90 seconds, said Draco, and kissed her again. They went to Pomfrey because Hermione insisted, and because a woman who has spent 7 weeks documenting an affliction does not stop documenting it at the interesting part. The hospital wing at 6 o'clock had the same chalky light it had held on the 4th of November, and the same smell of clean linen and dittany, And Madame Pomfrey looked up from her ledger at 2 dripping 8th years and set down her quill with an expression of profound resignation. "You are soaking my floor." "The bite's gone," Hermione said, and held out her wrist. "Completely. Approximately 40 minutes ago. There was a sort of ringing and then heat down the arm, and the mark went white and then simply wasn't there. It's consistent with the Portuguese account, which says the organism can't survive the deliberate utterance, and I'd like it recorded properly because the literature on this is genuinely disgraceful, and somebody ought to." Madame Pomfrey took her wrist, turned it to the lamp, and looked at it for perhaps 3 seconds. "Miss Granger," she said, "that mark has been gone for 9 days." The hospital wing went very quiet. "I'm sorry. 9 days. I checked it myself on the 10th, when you came for the burn on your thumb, and it was already fading, and by the 12th, there was nothing there but a shadow." Pomfrey let go of her wrist. "Pediculus cordis rarely survives a fortnight in a healthy adult, and it certainly cannot survive a valerian dampener, which suppresses the very concealment it feeds on. You starved the thing to death in a week. I assumed you'd work that out. You're generally so thorough." Hermione did not move. "The 12th, she said. "The 12th. The 12th of December." "That is generally what follows the 11th, said Madame Pomfrey, picking up her quill. Hermione turned round very slowly. Draco was standing 3 feet behind her, with rain still running off the hem of his coat, and he was not looking surprised. That was the thing. He was looking at the floor, and his jaw was set, and there was colour high on his cheekbones, and the silver ring was going round and round under his thumb. "You knew," she said. "No. Draco. I didn't know." He looked up. "I suspected. On the perimeter, the day I asked you to say my name. Your wrist was bare, you weren't wearing gloves, and I'd been looking at that mark every day since October, and it wasn't there anymore. And I told myself it was the potion covering it. And then, in the courtyard, at the winter thing, I looked again, and it still wasn't there." Hermione's throat had closed entirely. 9 days, she said. "You have known for 9 days that I was clean. On the scaffolding this afternoon, you stood there and told me I was still bitten. I told you nothing had changed, which was true, because I couldn't be certain. You could have asked her." Hermione flung a hand at Madame Pomfrey, who had returned with great dignity to her ledger. "She is 30 feet from where you sleep. At any point in 9 days you could have walked in here and asked one question and had the answer, and you did not, and I would very much like to know why." Draco said nothing. "Why? Because then I'd have had to do something about it," he said. And there it was, out at last, in the chalky light, with the rain going down the black windows. "If you were clean," he said, "then everything you'd done since November was yours. All of it. The hospital wing, the hand on my wrist, the library, the courtyard. Yours. Chosen. And then there'd have been nothing left standing between me and the fact of it except me." He had gone hoarse. "I have spent 7 weeks constructing very high-minded reasons why I couldn't have this. You said so yourself, on the scaffolding, in the rain. You said I'd built conditions that could never be satisfied, so that I'd never have to find out. You were right. You are always right. It's the second worst thing about you." And the moment Pomfrey said the words out loud, the last of them would have come down, and I would have had to walk up to you with nothing in my hands and no argument left, and simply... He stopped. "Simply what?" said Hermione. "Simply want it," he said, "in front of you, with no excuse for wanting it." Madame Pomfrey stood up, closed her ledger with a snap, and went into her office, and shut the door with the particular firmness of a woman who has decided that the next portion of the evening is none of her business. Hermione crossed the floor. She took his face in both hands, hers entirely, deliberately, no parasite anywhere in her blood, and none there for 9 days. And she said, "Then want it with no excuse." "Hermione, you have run out of conditions," she said. "There is no bug. There has been no bug since the 12th. I said it on that scaffolding with clean blood and full possession of every faculty I own. And you knew it when I said it, and you kissed me anyway. So let's have no further discussion about whose decision this was." Draco closed his eyes. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since a wood in October, when you set 40 seeds at the wrong depth and argued with me about a woman who wrote about chalk, and it has been the single most inconvenient event of my life, and I would not undo 1 hour of it." "There," said Hermione unsteadily. "Was that so difficult?" "Catastrophically." She kissed him, then in the empty hospital wing, standing in a puddle of December rain 3 feet from the bed, where a very small blue light had once landed on her wrist and told the truth about her. They set the last of the anchor mast on the 4th of January along the northern arc where the peat lay thinnest over the granite. The frost had come back, hard and bright and clean, and the forest edge stood white and utterly still, and Hermione knelt in it with her gloves on. She had put them back on. She had complained about the cold for the first 20 minutes, with reference to statistics about hypothermia, and Draco had listened to every word of it with an expression of the most extraordinary contentment. 2.5 inches, she said. 3 at the low ground. I know. I've known since October. She pressed the acorn into the frozen loam and felt the answering pulse as it took. I simply enjoy hearing you say it. He was working the line 4 feet away. He had taken off one glove to manage the seed pouch, and his hand was red with cold, and there was soil along his jaw where he'd pushed his hair back, and he did not know it was there. Hermione reached across and wiped it away with her thumb. She did it slowly, deliberately, with her whole attention on it, and she felt him go still under her hand. And when she took the thumb away, he caught her wrist, the clean one, the unmarked one, and turned it over and pressed his mouth to the inside of it, precisely where the bite had been. You could have done that in November, she said. I know. You could have done it in the hospital wing on the 4th. I very nearly did, said Draco Malfoy, and it would have saved us both a great deal of trouble, and I shall be making up for it steadily for approximately the next 60 years. The forest stood white and silent around them. Far off across the lawn, the castle showed its scaffolding black against a hard blue sky, and the last of the lanterns from the winter thing still hung along the north wall, waiting for someone to take them down, catching the low sun. Hermione Granger knelt in the frozen loam with her wrist in his hands and her face doing every single thing it wanted to do, and let it.
Thank you for staying with me to the end. I want to tell you what I was thinking about while I wrote this. I did not want to write a story about a magic bug, The bug was only a tool. I wanted to write about something else. I wanted to write about hiding. Most of us hide. We hide small things. We hide how much we care. We hide that we are lonely. We do it every day and we call it being strong. We call it being carefully. There is a scene in this story that I love the most. It is not the kiss, it is the moments in the library at 3 in the morning when Hermione reads one line in an old Portuguese book. The line says, "There is no cure but the saying of it." There is a whole story. That is the whole point. Draco spent 7 weeks building reasons, good reasons, kind reasons, and every reason is really the same thing, a way to never find out. So here's what I believe. A feeling you cannot hide is not a weaker feeling, it is a truer one, and the things you are most afraid to say it out loud is usually one thing that will set you free the moment you say it. Say it to the person it belongs to. That is only cure I know. Thank you for listening.